Ready, fire, aim. Why crowdfunding often ends in zeros. Plan, execute, and then crowdfund so you don't become a statistic. Hi, everyone. I'm Tessa with the Idea Pros marketing team. I have two special guests for you today. Well, one's a normal, but I have two guests for you. But before we dive into that, I just want to say hello to everyone that we have hopping in on both Facebook and YouTube. So thank you so much, everyone. I have Bill, Kelly, Genevieve, Stephanie, Kelly, Ben, and Sean. Thank you guys all for being here. I know I see a bunch of other people coming in, so thank you guys. And if you could share out this stream so that we can get the word out of there about crowdfunding, because this is an exciting topic. A lot of people do want to be able to raise funds for their business ideas. So I'm going to bring in two of my favorite people. I have Simon and Fred, and I'm just gonna give you guys a little background. So Fred is obviously co-founder and executive chairman of Idea Pros, and Simon Solatko, did I say that right? Solatko? Chief Marketing Officer of Idea Pros. So thank you guys so much for being here for this topic.
Hey, everybody.
Perfect.
So,
well, I'm going to let Fred take it from here.
Simon is our resident expert in that arena of crowdfunding. He's had a long history in marketing, lots of things with analytics and statistics, and maybe you can spend a couple of minutes. Simon, don't tell him everything because we don't have that kind of time. But most importantly, Simon has a lot of experience in crowdfunding endeavors. And you want to talk a little bit about that before we start?
Sure. Thanks a lot, Fred. So, I've been running crowdfunding campaigns off and on for the past decade, more on than off. In the meantime, I help companies kind of through the growth and acceleration stages. So I've seen everything from that point of origin where you're initially trying to, find $5,000 to get a business off the ground all the way through, we just hit $3 million in revenue. I've seen companies through that entire cycle, starting with crowdfunding. So I've got some good perspective and, dozens, if not about 100 crowdfunding case studies in my brain to reflect on. So I both succeeded and failed. Both are important, and you have the benefit, at least today, of talking to someone who's been there, done that, and seen a lot of what works and what doesn't. The most important thing in crowdfunding is care and planning. So we'll talk a lot about that today.
All right, thanks a lot. Anybody that tells you they've done crowdfunding events and have never failed are failing to tell you the truth. And so the important thing is that so many people talk about it, so many people have heard about it, so many people think this is a great avenue to take. That's not always the case. And in fact, often it's not the case. There's certain category of goods that do well in crowdfunding. And I know all my app people are going to be asking, what about apps? We're going to find a different way to do apps that they're really not great for crowdfunding environments. Maybe equity crowdfunding, which has its own difficulties, and we'll do a separate show on. But there are other ways to get out there with your app. So this is really product focused, and let's go through the major pitfalls that really show you why so many of them end up not getting any type of funding whatsoever.
Great. Well, there was a statistic, and we pulled this, we mentioned it in our emails that we sent out, but a lot of them fail, right? So like 70% of crowdfunding, somewhere around there, are actually failing. So one of the biggest things we want to find out is, why do 70% of those crowdfunding campaigns fail?
Sure. So, a lot of it is predetermined. If you have a product that is simply poorly suited to crowdfunding, that's a very easy red flag. So often people will approach me with B2B solutions. Those are no-go. Services are hard. Kickstarter seems to do best with products and established categories that consumers have demonstrated previous demand for. Now, big part of Kickstarter is doing something that nobody's done before. And so you wind up having to look at close analogs. So, sometimes whole new categories are launched on Kickstarter. It's amazing, the innovation that can happen there. But the key thing is really understanding whether or not your product meets some of these key requisites. It can't, in general, be too expensive. It helps if it isn't too inexpensive. It helps if you have an established audience who will crave the product, and if you've done that research. A lot of products fail because they haven't identified an audience in the earliest phases, and therefore when they hit Kickstarter, they really don't have a good start. And the other is, kind of some technical failures where there's just something about what you've done with the project that destined it for failure. One of those is setting a goal that's too high. And often people see Kickstarter as funding a certain phase of their business. And often that expectation is wrong. Kickstarter is often just the beginning of raising money for your business. And so if you load up the goal of the Kickstarter with too high of an initial burden, it discourages people from backing it, especially if early on it isn't particularly successful, doesn't have a lot of momentum. You can't set the goal too high. And so that's an important lesson. I've seen many really good projects where people wanted to raise a lot of money and could have raised a lot of money, but by putting that initial goal beyond the reach of that early set of backers, they never caught momentum. It can kill a business, these decisions. Also, fundamental decisions about pricing and reward tiers, those can also hinder or advantage a project.
So we've got product fit, consumer audience, so your target audience, if they like it. And then also you mentioned goals are too high, and price and goal and prize. Wait, what did you say?
Prizes.
Prizes. There we go. Like I got to get my terminology down here for crowdfunding.
So Simon is speaking from a standpoint of most of the people that we take in that route have some sort of corporate structure already. They have some sort of momentum as far as having human infrastructure in place. But we're speaking a lot to your kind of solopreneurs out there that don't have that infrastructure, and they have this product idea, and they want to use this as their first step to move forward. And part of the reason so many fail, besides all the singular items that Simon laid out, is the whole bucket of them. When you come out by yourself, I've seen it over and over and over again, where somebody has a great product idea, they jump into Kickstarter, they put out a page, and they turn the lights on, and they expect business to show up and start backing them. The whole magic, if you will, which is not magic at all, is when you go live, you already have to have a good piece of your audience in place. And that's what the kind of the regular entrepreneur that hasn't had this experience doesn't do. They don't have an audience. They expect to go there to find the audience. And there's something like 18 million people that are signed up for Kickstarter, but they're not going to find you without you having some momentum. Simon, do you want to talk a little bit more about that, and some of the process that's involved well ahead of the day you turn the lights on?
Sure. Ideally, you have that initial set of people who are going to back you before you launch the campaign. You've already engaged with them. You already talked to them. They've already told you they want to back you. Well, how do you get there? Well, it often involves pre-marketing, and a lot of this is in telling people about your idea and ensuring that they're excited about it in the first place. Enfranchising them often in the design and development, or at least initial critique, beta testing of the product. All these things are super useful because it is a path to get people to make a mental commitment to your project. And once they make that mental commitment, when you turn on the project, you properly notify them, you email them, you call them, you do whatever it takes, then they'll join on. If you haven't engaged people previously, that process then starts in the relatively short window of a Kickstarter project. And 30 days or 40 days is not very much time. Most of the successful projects I've been on have been actively engaging their target audience for 6 months, often a year, before the launch of the campaign. And even then, you still have that brief period of time to get them to pull out their wallets and help you out.
Yeah, and that's kind of what we do in the Idea Pros Launchpad. it's basically an incubation process, right? You want to see, do people think this is a cute baby or not? What are the comments you're getting? You haven't manufactured anything yet, and so you can take to heart whatever people are telling you, because changes can be made before you have a garage full of stuff. And so you get the feedback that you need. You start gathering that audience, and when Simon talks about people that have told you they want to buy this, or they're interested in buying it, we're not talking about a dozen friends. We're talking 10,000, 20,000 people or more if possible, because not all of them are going to buy. And in fact, a small, probably single-digit percentage of them are going to be buying in actuality. So you got to gather them, you have to nurture them, you have to get them to commit, and then you're still only going to get a percentage. But it is a process, and when you don't go through that, and most people don't, you end up being part of that 70% of big zeros.
And you're right, Fred. The Launchpad was specifically designed to do a lot of the things you do in best practices in pre-marketing. You get out a marketing presence, begin to engage audiences socially and by email. You run initial campaigns to see if you can't get people interested, to exhibit interest in your product. You get contact information. You begin to talk to people individually because you have that contact information and can do that nurture. So Launchpad is a great example of the kinds of things from a marketing perspective you'd want in place as you did pre-marketing.
Yep, thank you.
So I'm curious, well, a couple of things while you guys are here, because I know we have a lot of people. Tell me if crowdfunding is on your list right now, if it's something that you're thinking of. I know we have a lot of people in here, but I'm just curious if you're at that phase. And also, Simon, we were going to talk about what makes a campaign successful. And I know you started in on a couple of those things. I don't know if you want to cover a couple more of those items that can make your campaign successful, because we're kind of thinking about putting together a checklist of crowdfunding, like a little list for you guys. So if you want that, put checklist in the chat while we're talking.
Do you want to promote or use as an example one of the recent ones that you did, or you just want to do the golden widget or something?
Let's talk about some golden widgets. So one of my favorite golden widgets is the first thing I do is set up some spreadsheets and some notes where I can start to document plans. One of the things I say is, if you write things down, you're already in the top 90% of management in business. Writing things down is critical. One of the things I like to do is model out the crowdfunding campaign. So I like to say, well, what is a reasonable expectation about the number of backers, the financial return, and the costs associated with running the project? At that point, you start to say, well, are these numbers real, right? Is this a real reasonable expectation for what someone's willing to pay? You can then go ask people about that. Is this a reasonable number of potential backers? How many of these people do I have identified so far? How many people of those do I think I need to identify by the day before I launch? So modeling out the crowdfunded project and starting to write down your plan for pre-marketing and marketing, engagement, influencers, members of the community who think you are highly likely to back, who you want to call or email right before the project launches. All of those things need to be documented. And the other great thing about a documented plan is you can pass it around to other people. You can run it by experts or friends who've done it before. If you don't have those, maybe you can consult some of your backers who may have backed prior projects. It's really important to get other people's feedback. And the only way you can do that effectively is not to tell them the story, because everybody will generally tend to validate you. It's to write it down and ask them if they agree or disagree with specific points. Everybody will want to encourage you, but people will be more willing to critique and provide useful feedback on specific plans and assumptions. So that's number one. The other is, once you've done all that, you really need to ask yourself the question is the audience or an audience for this project able, willing, or potentially already on Kickstarter? Are they able to go there? Are they willing to go there? Or are they already there? If you're doing a board game, Kickstarter has become the natural incubator for board games. So the most important question to ask if you do a board game is my board game awesome? And will it stand out? The biggest thing when you're in an established category is getting above the noise. And so you've got to make sure both the product design and then your ideas for how you're reaching out to people, both will help you get out of the noise. If you're doing something that's innovative, I did a lot of projects at the dawn of the most recent virtual reality movement. We were creating a new category, but we quickly cultivated an enthusiast audience. And if you've got an enthusiast audience, that can be very helpful, because those people often tend to break rules and be willing to back projects or make a speculative purchase. So all of those, kind of early audience generation and building activities, they're all super important. You want to write them down, and then you need to relentlessly ask yourself the question, do I have enough people here to really make this thing fly? The one thing I do encourage all projects, especially at the beginning phase, is never look back. The joke is that you're allowed to ask how many backers we have already once you get your next backer. The other thing I tell people is sell, market, sell.
Sell, market, sell.
Sell, market, sell, which means you're selling today, you're going to do some marketing today, but you've got to keep selling. Selling is interesting. People believe, because we are in this digital age, that you can put something online, create some social media stuff or ads, and do some email, and that will create this, digital magic that will draw people into your project. It ain't so. The most effective
don't tell that secret.
The most effective tool in crowdfunding is to connect with people and pick up the phone. That's how you can get sales. And if you say, well, that's a lot of people to call, I'm like, yeah, that's a lot of people to call. That's what you're going to be doing. You're going to be calling people and asking them to back your project. The more you're on the phone, the more you're emailing, the more you're texting, the more you're vigilant in following up on questions and comments and posting updates. That engagement is the number one success vehicle once you've got a project that isn't destined for failure already.
He has so much great advice in there. I know you're dying to say something, Fred, so I wanted to make sure I got you up on the screen.
There's one piece of that advice that presumes things that I know that some of the watchers don't presume themselves, and that is money. You're when we're talking about doing all these things, it's not going to be free, and you have to have sufficient marketing budget and substantial, and you need to be spending some of that before you launch, and you need to be spending a whole bunch of it after you launch. Can you go into like our little moderate golden widget, what that might entail?
Yeah, I love demystifying the crowdfunding budget, because people have no idea what to spend money on. People are like, well, do I need to hire PR people, or do I need to do this or that? And it can be a little confusing, because there's all these things one can do in marketing. And then there are a very small subset of things that actually are useful to early stage crowdfunding projects. And so let's talk about a few of those. So the most important thing you can do is, first of all, make sure that your product is actually ready for production, or as close as you can possibly get it from a design perspective, from a prototype perspective. You really want to be able to show someone your product works. So a really good 3D printed model that actually functions is absolutely critical. You need a great prototype. Once you've got a great prototype, you can do all sorts of magical things with your great prototype. You can take video of you and all your buddies and all the people who you think will be using this, actually trying it out, using it, and saying that this solves a critical problem, or this is spectacularly awesome, and you want this thing on your desk, you want it in your garage, you want it in your home, you want your kids to use it, you want this to be a part of your life, and you want people to say that. And so great prototype creates opportunities for great content, video, photos, writing, testimonials. All of those things are meat and potatoes. The cost structure then is really all about the great prototype, the content that then derives from the great prototype, things like the Kickstarter video, secondary videos, even short videos, and then this kind of marketing outreach where you make sure you've got a big enough initial audience. You may have to spend some money to get there, good collateral, great outreach. And then once you're in flight, you got to make sure people are seeing the message, that it's getting amplified. Sometimes you'll have to spend some money on PR, sometimes influencers, sometimes it's just content marketing, making sure that there's enough being written and visually displayed about your product. But I will attest to one thing: phone calls are cheap these days. In fact, they're basically free, and so that is one of the high value things you can do to make sure that you're getting in front of people. And you will know based on those phone calls, another very valuable thing, whether or not people actually dig what you're doing or not. One of the most important rules of any new start venture is fail fast. So if you're
It's true.
fail,
We talk about that a lot.
You want to make sure you do it quickly so you don't bury yourself.
Yep. And Bill asked, how much money do you need to raise? Well, if you don't raise enough money to run your first production run, you haven't raised enough money. So,
let me talk about that.
Yeah.
I'm a contrarian on this one.
He is.
This is a near and dear to my heart. How much money do you need to raise? Let me give you an example of one of the best projects I ever run. It was a project for, we'll just call it a plastic widget. Happens to be a very awesome plastic widget. In Kickstarter, we raised $60,000. And that was cool. And we got some momentum. We got a bunch of backers. We got some enthusiasm. We were stoked. Okay. That was in April timeframe we did that. This is April a couple years ago. By the end of November, what we had done is we had moved our crowdfunding campaign from Kickstarter to Indiegogo. That's a unique transition. You can't go the other way. Run on Kickstarter, and then Indiegogo has their on-demand program, and we ran it there. Over that period, starting the day after our Kickstarter ended, we continued to sell like mad. And over that period, we raised over $400,000. Post Kickstarter. Then we did pre-sales on our website before we actually launched in November. So we continued to collect pre-orders. And by the end of the year, our revenue was over $1 million from a $60,000 Kickstarter. We had to look at the full financial profile of all of that to make sure that we were actually going to be able to meet expectations. Now, the good news is there's some variable costs. So you can, some of your cost depends on how much you're going to make. Understanding that you have a full cycle in which to sell. And if you have initial success, you can build on that and need to, because you're going to need that money to continue to invest and grow the business.
Yeah. So I think we actually agree with each other.
It wasn't a disagreement after all.
In different ways. You have to keep going until you have enough money to produce product. If you don't,
relentlessly.
Yeah. You got to give it all back. Nobody wants to do. Well, another guy.
People do that. You don't want to be that guy.
Well, Fred, I know that we had one last topic that you wanted to cover too, and that before we take off, and I know I'm supposed to keep you on time, and we had lots of people with great questions, so don't worry, guys. I am going to take a look at the questions. If we don't answer them on this one, it's going to go in the blog article, and we had a lot of people who said checklist, so that's something that we're going to put together for you. But the last thing that you wanted to talk about, Fred, was that it's not the end, right? So even what's next after crowdfunding, that's just the beginning, right?
Yeah, and I think Simon's example really illustrated that point. The crowdfunding can be several things, but even a successful one is just a gateway. It's the beginning. You're at the very least, you're validating that there's a demand for your product, and you're getting some momentum to get started. But what's next? You're not gonna really. Although companies make a living, right, Simon, on sticking into the on-demand environment in crowdfunding arenas, but you need to think about what you're going to do as an organization now that you have that initial momentum, how you're going to start growing out the company, how you're going to be filling more and more orders, what other channels you're going to go to accelerate the sales of any organization. So if you think of crowdfunding is just that first little push out of the nest with a parachute, then you're okay. If you think of it as the end all and be all of everything, you're probably going to be a little bit disappointed.
Kickstarter does force you to grow up fast, because all of a sudden you're accountable to deliver a bunch of product to a bunch of screaming backers, and they will be angry with you if you don't. So you do have to grow up fast, and you do have to, as you said, try to figure out what you want the business to be and how it's going to sell, right? How is this business going to sell? Where is it going to sell? Who's going to buy right after the Kickstarter? That's all super critical stuff. Best considered before you launch the Kickstarter. So,
sorry, my lights just went up.
You really got to stay focused on what you want the business to be and how the business ultimately will be successful. The one thing I will say is, it is a journey. It gets harder before it gets easier, and you're going to learn a lot in the early phase, but that learning, unfortunately, does not stop, and you just have to stay vigilant. The key for you is you have to maintain, as an entrepreneur, some optimism and a lot of focus, and you have to realize that no, you can't do it alone. You're going to need friends. You're going to want to build partnerships, and you're going to want to bring people onto your team who can be effective in helping you. And if you don't do that, you can be in trouble. The entrepreneurs I've worked with have generally entrusted me far more than they should have in the earliest phases. And it turned out that trust, which you extend in business, winds up being the most important thing. And often you do have to trust more than you feel like you can or should in order to get going. It gets very hairy, and you need all sorts of skills. You need extra hands. You need people to bounce ideas off of. You need partners and friends, and you need then this myopic focus on execution.
Yeah, and for those of you to say, all right, I've heard enough. There's no way I'm going to be doing this on my own. There are different groups out there that will run your crowdfunding campaigns for you. We're working with some of the best, and just to give you an idea of a budget for a relatively small campaign, probably $25,000 to the company that's going to be running the campaign for you. They're going to get a piece of everything they raise, anywhere from 10 to 30%, 20% is probably common. And then you have to have a fairly significant advertising budget, even for a small thing, $25,000 for that as well. So you're looking at $50,000 if you're going to be doing it with another company. And again, that's a small thing. The plastic widget that Simon was talking about, I think you guys spent a whole lot more than that over time. Did you not, Simon? I don't know, but
no, it was very challenging. We were always looking for money. The reason we were always looking for money is because we were growing. And growing is a cash thief. Working capital becomes critical, and it's challenging to stay on the ball even when you're successful. The one thing I will say is you've got to you really got to stay persistent and build partnerships and friendships and get enough people working on your project so that it can actually produce what you aim to. In terms of the costs, you can do smaller projects, and often I encourage people in the earliest phases of business to do something small scale. But if your project is complicated, it involves plastic, electronics, software, these can really create a lot of complexity and cost up front. So if you're a first-time entrepreneur, or you've been an entrepreneur before, but you don't have a lot of money to throw at it, you've got to choose something that's right scaled for you, something that you know how to get done, and something that can be done affordably with a modestly sized audience. Those projects exist, but if you're shooting the moon and you're doing something substantial, these numbers are just starter numbers. And as you lean into the business and build revenue, you'll be spending it on continuing to grow the business.
Great. Well, thank you guys so much. Thank you, Simon, for coming on.
Questions. I love being asked questions, Tess, if we got them.
Yeah, we do have a couple questions. It's up to Fred. Fred, are you cool with staying on for a couple extra minutes?
Yeah.
I know we have them. Yeah, it's just our numbers keep going up at the last couple of seconds here anyway. So yeah, we have a couple great questions. So I know that the budget one came up. So I think we answered Bill's question, which was more about, does every product kind of have its own circumstance? And I think you answered that, and it does, as far as how quickly they're going to fundraise.
So that's it?
Okay. I think so, Simon. Don't you think you answered this question already?
No, move through the questions.
All right. He's like, yeah, do it. All right. Yeah. So then let me grab some others.
And Kickstarter, by the way, is a company. William was asking that question. And
Aziz. Yep. And Aziz asked what a substantial budget was, and we got that one answered. So just scrolling back here. Fred, do you see any that you want to cover right away?
Not a one.
Not one, not yet. Let me get back to the beginning because I know that was some really good questions.
Let me while you're doing that, let me give you my final thought before the final thought.
Sure.
This is just one avenue, right? And as we said in the very beginning, crowdfunding is not for everybody. It won't work for everybody, but think of it as diverse roads to get you to where you need to go. Where do you need to go? With like Simon's example for crowdfunding, sell, market, sell, right? You need to sell that golden widget one more time. And whether or not you can afford crowdfunding or whether crowdfunding works out for you, there are other ways to do that. Go find some small influencers on social media that might work with you for some free golden widgets or from a little piece of your company. Go stand on street corners and yell at the top of your lungs. We're going to cover a lot of different ways to get started. This is just one, but it's for the right company at the right time. It's a really cool tool.
Right. So this one is a good question. How long should a crowdfunding campaign last?
A little longer than you think. That's the answer. So I find the 30 days is tough because I always screw up the first week and do things wrong or go slow or things happen. So I like doing 40-day campaigns. Yeah, that's kind of my sweet spot, 40 or 42, answer to the universe.
But also to your point,
sorry.
while it was 40 days, that wasn't enough. You had to go and you went to another.
You keep selling, keep crowdfunding afterwards.
Yeah. Tessa, let me get you another light.
My light sensor. Oh my gosh, this is going to go on a blooper reel, you know it well. Which category of products are the best qualifiers for crowdfunding and actually make it very well? I think you covered a little bit of this on the first
I'll give you the top level. Top level is cool things that lots of people love. Okay? Now, in terms of and in general, I like prices that are above. I want a reward tier that's $50 or above. I really want a $50 reward tier because the acquisition costs, using digital sales or marketing can be $5 or $10. If the thing you're selling is $25, all your potential benefit from having gotten the backer goes away. So I really like to have a high volume reward that's about $50. Ideally 50 to 100. And then there are lots of products that are more expensive, 400, then it's a little easier. And then you're not as worried. Then you're more worried about, is it too expensive for someone to purchase when there's a potential that they're never going to get it. So you start getting into some of those never reaches. So it's a combination of, the price you need to offer the thing at and its general appeal to an audience of people who get excited about it.
Excellent. Well, thank you guys. I mean, honestly, we've had lots of people are saying this is one of the best shows. That was actually in here too. Sean Reed said great advice, Simon. And I'm really excited. Actually, someone, and I'm trying to find it, said that this was one of the best shows, even though they're an app person. So thank you, Stephanie. We really enjoyed having Simon on. And as always, Fred, thank you so much for being here. Everyone, thank you for being here. Every Friday at noon Pacific time, we cover topics that are helpful for all entrepreneurs, not just our partners. Any topics that you want to have us cover, please put in the chat, or you can fill out the form on our posts and submit questions ahead of time. So we'll see you guys all next week.
Yep. Have a great week.
Thank you.
Thanks, Fred.
Thanks. Bye.